Guys, I'm down in Germany for Expression Fest, and I just found out that Nosferatu himself, Count Dracula von Hominem von Orlok, is poised to be in attendance. And as if that isn't cool enough on its own, he's supposedly bringing a bat with him. Shh, shh, guys, I think I hear him coming.
Alright, fine.
Huh, well that's just not scary at all. Oh God! Released in 1997 for the Sony Playstation, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a 2D action RPG by Konami. The game serves as a direct sequel to the PC Engine CD game Castlevania Rondo of Blood, and follows Dracula's son Alucard as he explores his father's castle after Richter Belmont has gone missing and the Vampire King's home has seemingly resurfaced out of nowhere. Symphony of the Night represents a shift in approach for the Castlevania franchise, forgoing the series' usual linear platforming action in favor of non-linearity and systems more becoming of a role-playing game. Despite universal acclaim when it was first released, the game failed to sell well due to poor marketing and the fact that gamers had seemingly left 2D gaming behind by 1997, with the likes of IGN comparing its graphics to games for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. It did, however, manage to pick up steam and become one of the PlayStation's most beloved titles over time though due to word of mouth, and has since garnered a reputation of being among the best Castlevania games as well as a pioneer of the Metroidvania genre. I first played through Symphony of the Night back in 2009 when I had some leftover Microsoft points and picked up the Xbox Live port while I was home from school with the flu for a couple of days. And despite not really being into Metroidvanias or much of a single player gamer at all at the time, I was actually pretty blown away by the game. However, I didn't end up getting that far into the game and ended up dropping it after a while to play other games that were, honestly, probably multiplayer shooters because that's just what I was into at the time. But my fascination with and interest in the game never waned, and I spent the intervening 12 years wanting to circle back to it, which is what brings me here today with the first installment in a hopeful new segment for the channel called One Playthrough Later. My hopeful goal for this segment is to chronicle and document my thoughts and opinions on popular or seminal games that I never got to play through, as well as to try and explore why they've connected with so many players over the years and why it took me so long to pick them up to begin with. Whereas a lot of my other videos try to answer the question of whether or not a game holds up after an arbitrary number of years, I'm hoping that this series will give me the chance to meditate over my experience with a game as opposed to whether or not it was simply fun to play. So, without further ado, here are my thoughts on Castlevania Symphony of the Night, one playthrough later. Before we continue though, a quick question of the day. What was the first console that you ever owned? While I grew up with an NES and Genesis in my house thanks to my parents, the first console that I could really call my own was either the Game Boy Color or the Nintendo 64. One of my earliest memories was actually getting a Kiwi Game Boy Color with a copy of Pokemon Red and Super Mario Land when I was little, and being obsessed with the thing even though I could never get past Misty's Gym or the second world of Super Mario Land. Seriously, I loved my Game Boy Color, and even though it's seen better days and no longer has a working speaker, I still own my childhood unit. Be sure to leave an answer to the question of the day over in the comments. I'd love to hear your answer. And with that out of the way, on with the video. Upon booting up the game, you're greeted with an adaptation of the final boss battle from Castlevania Rondo of Blood, which is the climactic battle between Richter Belmont and Dr. Acula himself. I personally found this to be a great way to start the game off, as it allows for fans of the classic Castlevania gameplay style to scratch that itch a bit and also allows players to grow a little acquainted with the controls. I also just think it's kinda cool to open the game with a bit of a prelude in general, as well as at the climax of another story to begin with, as it serves as a really fun way to hook players with solid action and a more powerful character before the game officially starts and they're stuck with an, at least at the moment, weaker Alucard. Another great example of a game that does this is the original Metroid Prime, which has you traverse an introductory tutorial area with a reasonably powered up Varia suit before saying psych and taking all of your abilities away. While I've never played Rondo of Blood before, this had to have been a pretty nice touch for fans of the series, despite the fact that the game wasn't released in the US until sometime in the 2000s, outside of what I heard is a fairly middle-of-the-road SNES port. Still, I kinda wonder whether or not players were confused by this back in the day though, as they were ostensibly getting a sequel to a story that a lot of them probably didn't get to experience in the first place.
What the hell is this?
You ain't taking no more blood from my hoe slapping hand. I will pimp slap you.
That aside, it's not like they couldn't have pieced together the basic chain of events leading up to this game or anything, and not fully knowing or understanding the lore or plot of the Castlevania series doesn't really impact how utterly enjoyable it is to trek through Dracula's castle to begin with. The game's appeal lies in how it transformed Castlevania's linear, action-heavy format by introducing non-linearity and RPG elements alongside that patented action. It takes a few cues from the likes of Super Metroid and other side-scrolling adventure games and creates a world that features a number of branching pathways for you to explore, but also features enough straightforward corridors to keep you from getting too lost within it. It also helps that the game has the same exact map system from Super Metroid by giving the player something to reference whenever they come to a dead end and need to backtrack or find another way through the castle. Overall, the game's inclusion of elements from what would later become known as the Metroidvania genre feel more like a gradual and elegant transition from sleep to wakefulness as opposed to being startled and jeered awake.
Peter, wake up.
Symphony of the Night feels like a fusion of the exploration that makes something like Super Metroid such an engrossing experience with the satisfying action and combat of a Castlevania game. This combination makes for an extremely fun and accessible adventure and is ultimately aided by the game's surprisingly forgiving for the series difficulty curve, the fluidity of Alucard's movement and control, and how utterly satisfying the game's combat feels. Seriously, Symphony of the Night's combat is a treat. It feels relatively similar to the combat found in other Castlevanias, but is a bit quicker and features a helpful backdash that allows you to build some distance between you and your opponent. It also has some added depth too, thanks to the game's newfound RPG systems and structure. Even better, the game doesn't buckle under all these features either, and manages to remain a fairly approachable adventure for more casual players. Part of what kinda made me shy away from this one for so long is the fact that the Castlevania series is somewhat known for its difficulty. And while I see the appeal of difficult games and don't mind playing through a game that's challenging from time to time, it honestly kept me a casual fan of the franchise at best.
Too hard.
But comparatively, Symphony of the Night is actually a fairly laid-back game for most of the ride. I mean, it does have a couple of parts that are hard, don't get me wrong, but the game isn't anywhere near as hard or frustrating as some of the other Castlevanias that I've played over the years. Because you can always level your character up or try to score some equipment to make you more powerful, a lot of the game's challenges feel pretty reasonable. And for die-hard Castlevania fans that are in need of something more challenging and in-depth, the game even features multiple endings and an inverted castle that encourages more exploration and tougher enemies. While I didn't end up exploring enough of the map to unlock the inverted castle, it's great to see that Konami did something like that and that it's available for fans. And even though I wasn't able to see that stuff for myself in this playthrough, I definitely plan to do so in the future and see myself replaying this game many more times in the coming years. I was actually fairly sick and bedridden while I played through this game, and I was honestly surprised by how relaxing I found my experience with it. And that's weird. Like, it's kinda strange to find a game about traversing your murderous vampire dad's castle and cold-bloodedly murdering all of his demon and undead buddies relaxing, but here we are. Something about making my way through the castle was genuinely comforting and engrossing for me, to the point where I tended to avoid using the game's fast travel system to jump around the map because I genuinely loved running around and killing enemies that much. Even without getting to explore the inverted castle, I felt like the base experience on display here was extremely satisfying and well worth the price of admission. Which reminds me, Symphony of the Night is readily available on a huge variety of systems and has a number of modern re-releases releases that are priced extremely well. Aside from the original PlayStation release, you could play through this game on anything from the Sega Saturn to the PSP, iOS and Android, the Xbox 360, One, and Series consoles, as well as the PS4 and the PS5.
Or you could just emulate it for free.
As I was saying.
Anyway, I haven't even gotten to touch on the visuals and music in this game yet, which are both brilliant. While some critics back in the day found it disappointing that the game wasn't in 3D, it's probably one of the best looking 2D games that I've ever played, and features everything from environmental effects to enemy rotation and scaling, and layered backgrounds with a ton of parallax scrolling. It even features some 3D elements thrown in for added depth, such as the clock tower at the beginning of the game and the coffin that you save your progress in. Honestly, it's pretty disappointing that this game got so heavily dismissed over what it wasn't, as opposed to appreciated over what it was. Because yeah, the game looks wonderful and makes me wish that we got more 2D platformers with this kind of attention to detail in it in the 32-bit era. I also appreciate the fact that this game runs at a silky smooth 60 frames per second on every release except for the Saturn version, which I've heard is a bit of a butchered port that's probably better left covered on its own. And the music. Oh man, the music. Symphony of the Night's music is so amazing.
Oh, hello.
The game balances intense rock music alongside gothic, cathedral, jazz, and classical in a way that's absolutely mesmerizing. Parts of the soundtrack have some serious Renaissance vibes and are a total blast to listen to. They also kinda remind me of that Tom Cruise movie, Interview with a Vampire, so that's a thing.
What have we told you?
Never in the house.
I mean it though, Symphony of the Night's soundtrack has to be one of the best video game soundtracks that I've ever listened to, and I've held it in such regard since my first experience with the game back in 2009, which I think really says something about how great the music is, since I only got a few hours into the game back then, but managed to basically commit parts of its soundtrack to memory despite that. The music makes great use of the PlayStation's CD quality audio and happens to have this simultaneously compressed but deep mix that I strongly associate with Sony's 32-bit hardware. While I do love music and consider myself something of a casual musicologist, I don't know if I can adequately put to words how Symphony of the Night's soundtrack works as well as it does. The best I can do, however, is say that the music and the sonic qualities used to present it to us kinda make it feel like a very authentically gamey experience. And the same goes for the game's iconically hammy voice acting too, because while it certainly isn't great on an objective level, there's a very nostalgic quality to the stilted delivery of dialogue here that's a really fun throwback to the voice acting of years past, even though I wasn't personally there to experience much of it myself back in the 90s.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets!
There's a certain quality to the audio presentation that heightens the mise-en-scène, or general mood, of the game to a level of stylized and exaggerated media that's very becoming of a Dracula story's gothic backdrop. It adds a surrealist touch to the dramatic battle between good and evil that's unfolding in the castle, and I just generally think it's awesome. I honestly don't know why it took me so long to pick this one up again after I'd put it down, because as far as Metroidvanias go, Symphony of the Night was actually one of the more accessible games in the genre for me. Going into this, I had some aversions to wanting to play through a Metroidvania due to some admittedly incorrect misconceptions that I had about the genre. For whatever reason, I always believed that the genre was a bit too, for lack of a better term, needy for my tastes due to its emphasis on presenting open-ended game design to the player and emphasizing things like backtracking and puzzle solving. Growing up, I had a pretty strong preference for more laid-back or arcadey titles and tended to struggle with non-linear game design. However, I found myself really engrossed with the adventure presented here, as well as really surprised by how wrong my initial assumptions about the genre were to begin with. I think those preconceived notions about Metroidvanias were mostly informed by playing games like the original Metroid as a kid, which are great games that I enjoy a ton to this day, but represent the genre at its most larval state. However, and I can't stress this enough, that point has more to do with my personal game preferences and how they may have grown or developed in the years since I, somewhat unfairly, dismissed the genre as not being for me. But the fun thing about opinions and misconceptions is that a fairly open-minded person can actually challenge them if they'd like to. And while I didn't really have to do that in the case of Symphony of the Night, I did get to walk away from this playthrough with a new opinion on Metroidvanias as a whole. Basically, Symphony of the Night makes me want to play more Metroidvanias in the future. In much the same way that a vampire's bite can turn someone into a vampire themselves, Symphony of the Night's Metroidvania gameplay has converted me into being a bigger Metroidvania fan. So if you're like me and you haven't played through Castlevania Symphony of the Night before, I can't recommend it enough. It's readily available and runs great on a wide variety of platforms, it's absolutely gorgeous, and it makes for a great and memorable experience. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. Feel free to like, comment, or subscribe if you want to help the channel grow, and feel free to leave an answer to the question of the day if you haven't already, or leave a recommendation for a game you want to see me review in a future video. On top of that, if you want to support the channel more monetarily, you could consider donating to me via Buy Me a Coffee. It's a site that acts a lot like a tip jar that allows you to donate however much you'd like to help me prioritize creating longer and greater videos. It's totally optional though, so seriously, don't worry about it if you don't want to donate. I only bring it up because I got some donations on it recently from a couple of my subscribers, and I thought I may as well mention it in a video itself. You could also hit me up on Twitter or Instagram by looking up @NichePlays on those respective apps, or by following the link over in the description. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and that if you decide to play through Symphony of the Night for the first time, or just to play through it again in general because it's amazing, that you have a great time doing so. So yeah, bye.